Welcome to our session on security, titled Securing Your Cloud Everywhere. With me is Bryan Langston, Senior Solutions Engineer from Mirantis, who leads security initiatives for Mirantis' most security-conscious customers. Our topic today is security, and we're setting the bar high by talking in some depth about the requirements of the most highly regulated industries. So, Bryan, for regulated industries, what do you perceive as the benefits of evolution from classic infra as a service to container orchestration?
Yeah, the adoption of container orchestration has given rise to 5 key benefits. The first is accountability. Think about the evolution of DevOps and the security-focused version of that team, DevSecOps. These 2 competencies have emerged to provide, among other things, accountability for the processes they oversee, the outputs that they enable. The second benefit is auditability. Logging has always been around, but the pervasiveness of logging data within container environments allows for the definition of audit trails in new and interesting ways. The third area is transparency. Organizations that have well-developed container orchestration pipelines are much more likely to have a higher degree of transparency in their processes. This helps development teams move faster. It helps operations teams identify and resolve issues easier, and helps simplify the observation and certification of security operations by security organizations. The next is quality. Several decades ago, Toyota revolutionized the manufacturing industry when they implemented the philosophy of continuous improvement. Included within that philosophy was this dependency and trust in the process. As the process was improved, so did the quality of the output. Similarly, the refinement of the process of container orchestration yields a higher quality output. The 4 things I've mentioned ultimately points to a natural outcome, which is speed. When you don't have to spend so much time wondering who does what or who did what, when you have the clear visibility to your processes, and because you can continuously improve the quality of your work, you aren't wasting time in a process that produces defects or spending time in wasteful rework phases. You can move much faster, and we've seen this to be the case with our customers.
So what is it specifically about container orchestration that gives these benefits? I guess I'm really asking, why are these benefits emerging now around these technologies? What's enabling them?
Right, so I think it boils down to 4 things related to the orchestration pipelines that are also critical components to successful security programs for our customers in related industry. The first one is policy. One of the core concepts in container orchestration is this idea of declaring what you want to happen, or declaring the way you want things done. One place where declarations are made are policies. So as long as we can define what we want to happen, it's much easier to do complementary activities like enforcement, which is our second enabler. Tools that allow you to define a policy typically have a way to enforce that policy. Where this isn't the case, you need to have a way of enforcing and validating the policy's objectives. Mirantis' tools allow custom policies to be written and also enforce those policies. The third enabler is the idea of a baseline. Having a well-documented set of policies and processes allows you to establish a baseline. It allows you to know what's normal. Having a baseline allows you to measure against it as a way of evaluating whether or not you're achieving your objectives with container orchestration. The 4th enabler of benefits is continuous assessment, which is about measuring constantly. Back to what I said a few minutes ago with the Toyota way, measuring constantly helps you see whether your processes and your target end state are being delivered. As your output deviates from that baseline, your adjustments can be made more quickly. So these 4 concepts, I think, can really make or break your compliance status.
It's a really interesting way of thinking about compliance. I had thought previously about compliance mostly as a matter of legally declaring and then trying to do something. But at this point, we have methods beyond legal boilerplate for asserting what we want to happen, as you say. and this is actually opening up new ways to detect deviation and enforce failure to comply. That's really exciting.
Right.
So you've touched on the benefits of container orchestration here, and you've provided some thoughts on what the drivers and enablers are. So where does Mirantis fit in all this? How are we helping enable these benefits?
Right. Well, our goal at Mirantis is ultimately to make the world's most compliant distribution. We understand what our customers need, and we've developed our product around those needs. And I can describe a few key security aspects about our product. So Mirantis promotes this idea of building and enabling a secure software supply chain. The simplified version of that pertains directly to our product follows a build, ship, run model. So at the build stage is Docker Trusted Registry. This is where images are stored, following numerous security best practices. Image scanning is an optional but highly recommended feature to enable within DTR. Image tags can be regularly pruned so that you have the most current validated images available to your developers. And the second or middle stage is the ship stage, where Mirantis enforces policies that also follow industry best practices, as well as custom image promotion policies that our customers can write and align to their own internal security requirements. The third and final stage is the run stage. And at this stage, we're talking about the engine itself. Docker Engine Enterprise is the only container runtime with FIPS 140-2 cryptography and has many other security features built in. Communications across the container platform are all secure by default. So this build, ship, stage model is one way of how our product helps support this idea of a secure supply chain. There are other aspects of the secure supply chain that are more customer specific that I won't go into, but that's kind of how we can help our product. The second big area, so I just touched on the secure supply chain. The second big area is in a STIG certification. A STIG is basically an implementation or configuration guide, but it's published by the U.S. government for products used by the U.S. government. It's not exclusive to them, but for customers that value security highly, especially in a regulated industry, will understand the significance and value that this STIG certification brings. So in achieving this certification, we've demonstrated compliance or alignment with a very rigid set of guidelines. Our FIPS validation, the cryptography, and the STIG certification are third-party attestations that our product is secure, whether you're using our product as a government customer, whether you're a customer in a regulated industry, or something else.
I did not understand what the STIG really was. It's helpful because this is not something that I think people in the industry by and large talk about. I suspect because these things are hard to get and time consuming to get.
Yes.
And so they don't tend to bubble up to the top of marketing speak the way glitzy new features do that may or may not be secure.
Yes, this is very time intensive.
So then moving on, how has container orchestration changed how your customers approach compliance assessment and reporting?
Yeah, this has been an interesting experience and observation as we've worked with some of our customers in these areas. So I'll call out three areas. One is the integration of assessment tooling into the overall development process. The second is assessment frequency. And then the third is how results are being reported, which includes what data is needed to go into the reporting. There are very likely others that could be addressed, but those are three things that I've noticed personally in working with customers.
What do you mean exactly by integration of assessment tooling?
Yeah, so our customers all generally have some form of a development pipeline and process. So with various third-party and open source tools that can be inserted at various phases of the pipeline to do things like static source code analysis or host scanning or image scanning and other activities, what's not very well established in some cases is how everything fits within the overall pipeline framework. So fit to many customers ends up having a conversation with us about what commands should be run, with what permissions, where in the environment should things run, how does code get there that does the scanning, where does the data go once the scan is done, and how will I consume it? These are all things where we can help our customers understand what integration of assessment tooling really means.
It is fascinating to hear this, and maybe we can come back to it at the end. But what I'm picking out of this, the way you speak about this and this conversation, is this kind of reemergence of these Japanese innovations in productivity, in factory floor productivity, like just-in-time delivery and the Toyota Miracle and that kind of stuff. Fundamentally, it's someone yesterday, Anders Wahlgren from CloudBees, of course, a CI/CD expert, told me that one of the things he likes to tell his consultees and customers is to put a GoPro on the head of your code and figure out where it's going and how it's spending its time, which is very reminiscent of these 1950s time and motion studies, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That people, pioneered accelerating the factory floor in industrial America of the mid-century. The idea that we should be coming back around to this and doing it at light speed with code now is quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's funny how many of those same principles are really transferable from 50, 60, 70 years ago to today. So, quite fascinating.
So, getting back to what you were just talking about, integrating assessment tooling, it sounds like that's very challenging. And you mentioned assessment frequency and reporting. What is it about those areas that's required adaptation? Yeah,
so assessment frequency, in legacy environments, if we think about what those looked like not too long ago, compliance assessment used to be a relatively infrequent activity in the form of some kind of an audit, whether it be a friendly peer review or an intra-company audit, formal third-party assessments, whatever. In many cases, these were big, lengthy reviews full of interview questions, requests for information, periods of data collection, and then the actual review itself. One of the big drawbacks to this lengthy engagement and infrequent engagement is that vulnerabilities would sometimes go unnoticed or unmitigated until these reviews happened. But in this era of container orchestration, with the decomposition of everything in the software supply chain, and with clearer visibility of the various inputs to the build lifecycle, our customers can now focus on what tooling and processes can be assembled together in the form of a pipeline that allows constant inspection of a continuous flow of code from start to finish. And they're asking how our product can integrate into their pipeline, into their QA frameworks to help simplify this continuous assessment framework. So that kind of addresses the frequency challenge. Now, regarding reporting, our customers have had to reevaluate how results are being reported and the data that's needed in the reporting. The root of this change is in the fact that security has multiple stakeholder groups, and I'll just focus on two of them. One is development, and their primary focus, if you think about it, is really about finding and fixing defects. That's all they're focused on really as they're pushing code. The other group, though, is the Security Project Management Office, or PMO. This group is interested in what security controls are at risk due to those defects. So the data that you need for these two stakeholder groups is very different, but because it's also related, it requires a different approach to how the data is expressed, formatted, and ultimately integrated with sometimes different data sources to be able to appease both use cases.
So how does Mirantis help improve the rate of compliance assessment, as well as this question of the need for differential data presentation?
Right. So we've developed and exposed APIs that help report the compliance status of our product as it's implemented in our customer's own environment. So Through these APIs, we express the data in industry standard formats using OSCAL. OSCAL is a relatively new project out of the NIST organization. It's really all about standardizing a set of standards, a set of formats that expresses control information. So in this way, our customers can get machine and human readable information related to compliance. And that data can then be massaged into other tools or downstream processes that our customers might have. And what I mean by downstream processes is if you're a development team and you have the inspection tools, the processes to gather findings, defects related to your code, a downstream process might be the ticketing system with Jira that might log a formal defect for that finding. But it all starts with having a common standard way of expressing the scan output and the findings such that both development teams and the security PMO groups can both benefit from the data. So essentially, we've been following this philosophy of transparency in security. And what we mean by that is security isn't or should not be a black box of information only accessible and consumable by security professionals. Assessment is happening proactively in our product, and it's happening automatically. We're bringing security out of obscurity by exposing the aspects of our product that ultimately have a bearing on your compliance status, and then making that information available to you in very user-friendly ways.
It's fascinating. I have been excited about OSCAL since first hearing about it. It seems extraordinarily important to have what is in effect a query capability,
right?
That lets different people for different reasons formalize and ask questions of a system that is constantly in flux.
Exactly.
Very, very powerful. So regarding security, what do you see as the basic requirements for container infrastructure and tools for use in production by the industries that you are working with?
Right. So obviously, the tools and infrastructure is going to vary widely across customers, but to generalize it, I would refer back to the concept I mentioned earlier of a secure software supply chain. There are several guiding principles behind this that are worth mentioning. The first is to have a strategy for ensuring code quality. What this means is being able to do static source code analysis. Static source code analysis tools are largely language specific, so there may be a few different tools that you'll need to have to be able to manage that. Second point is to have a framework for doing regular testing or even slightly more formal security assessments. There are plenty of tools that can help get a company started doing this. Some of these tools are scanning engines like OpenSCAP. That's also a product of NIST. OpenSCAP can use CIS benchmarks as inputs, and these tools do a very good job of summarizing and visualizing output. Along the same family or idea of CIS benchmarks, there's many benchmarks that are published, and if you look at your own container environment, there are very likely to be many benchmarks that can form the core platform, the building blocks of your container environment. There's benchmarks for Ubuntu, for Kubernetes, for Docker, and it's always growing. In fact, Mirantis is editing the benchmark for Container D. So that'll be a formal CIS benchmark coming up very shortly. Next item would be defining security policies that align with your organization's requirements. There are a lot of things that come out of box, that come standard, that come default in various products, including ours. But we also give you, through our product, the ability to write your own policies that align with your own organization's requirements. Minimizing your attack surface is another key area. What that means is only deploying what's necessary. Pretty common sense, but sometimes it's overlooked. What this means is really enabling required ports and services and nothing more. And it's related to this concept of least privilege, which is the next thing I would suggest focusing on. Least privilege is related to minimizing your attack surface. It's about only allowing permissions to those people or groups that, that are absolutely necessary. Within the container environment, you'll likely have heard this deny-all approach. This deny-all approach is recommended here, which means deny everything first and then explicitly allow only what you need. So that's a very common thing that's sometimes overlooked in some of our customer environments. And then finally, the idea of defense in depth, which is about minimizing your blast radius by implementing multiple layers of defense that also are in line with your own risk management strategy. So following these basic principles, adapting them to your own use cases and requirements, in our experience with our customers, they can go a long way in having a secure software supply chain.
Thank you very much, Bryan. That was pretty eye-opening. And I had the privilege of listening to it from the perspective of someone who has been working behind the scenes on the Launchpad 2020 event. So I'd like to use that privilege to recommend that our listeners, if you're interested in this stuff, certainly if you work within one of these regulated industries in a development role, that you may want to check out, which will be easy for you to do today since everything is available once it's been presented, Matt Bentley's live presentation on secure supply chain, where he demonstrates one possible example of a secure supply chain that permits image signing, image scanning, and content trust. You may want to check out the session that I conducted with Anders Valcom at CloudBees, who talks about these industrial efficiency, factory floor, time and motion models for assessing where software is in order to understand what policies can and should be applied to it. And you will probably want to frequent the tutorial sessions in that track to see about how Docker Enterprise Container Cloud implements many of these concentric security policies in order to provide, as you say, defense in depth. There's a lot going on in there, and it's fascinating to see it all expressed. Bryan,
Absolutely.
Thanks again. This has been really, really educational.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, you too. Bye.